Thanks for coming. This is our fourth meetup. Tonight we have Dylan from 118 Group, which is, I believe, the largest WordPress agency on the Cape, talking to us about accessibility.
All right. So yeah, my name is Dylan. I work with 118 Group. We're a team of 5, and we do WordPress websites for solopreneurs, nonprofits, online stores, you name it. My background, I'm not developer heavy. I'm a lot of front end, and then I do a lot of project management, which, as anybody in here who does websites knows, websites require a lot of project management. That's like 60% of the battle, which is why accessibility is such an important starting point for kind of this new phase of websites. How many people in here work with accessibility or actively plan accessibility into all of their builds? Sort of is generally, that's generally how the response. It's whether it's bare minimum or just kind of the basics. That's generally what people say. And the question is, what is an accessible website? So what does accessible mean? And how do you get there? So that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight. So the short answer for what does accessible mean is it's a website that can be used effectively by all audiences, including people with disabilities. The long answer is way less fun. This is the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, a recent update. And it is just a bear. This is all criteria that you need to address if you want to claim that your website is accessible. So, and trust me, I've gone through every single one of these. There's a lot to it. Accessibility is broken out into A, AA, and AAA. AAA is you meet all of the criteria listed out in the WCAG guidelines. AA means you meet most of the criteria, and single A means you don't really meet much of the criteria. And why that's important is it's going to come down to legality and liability reasons, and that's kind of the next thing we're going to talk about. But I mean, this kind of breaks it down. You've got, and I could spend the whole next 3 weeks going through what each of these means, and but they're kind of basically broken down into a few basic layouts, colors, semantics, yada yada yada. But why does it matter? Why should we care about accessibility? Why should I spend extra time worrying about accessibility? Why should I invest extra money thinking about accessibility? And it's some of the same questions we face in a physical reality. Why do handicap parking spaces matter? Why do ramps matter? Why does Braille matter? Why do wheelchairs matter? The same answer for that can be applied to why it matters to have an accessible website. Why does the internet matter? Well, the internet matters because it's a way to share ideas and communicate information. Well, 285 million people worldwide can't read web content. So, for the same reasons you need to have wheelchairs, you need to have accessible websites, especially if you're serving an audience. People in your audience might be seeking information that they need to be able to access through your website. How do I know web accessibility is becoming a big deal? Recently? Well, Google Trends just basically looks at keyword research and searches. And as you can see from, I think this is 2015 or 2013 or 2012, it's steadily climbing, the queries for accessibility. You can see here related queries. Some of these things are seeing 7, 8, 9, 1,000% increases. It's really hot right now. A simple Google search for website ADA compliance, and you could spend all day on these articles, why you should be worried, checklists, 5 steps, ADA compliance, beginner's guides, toolkits, compliance software. I mean, there's a whole industry exploding right now just on web accessibility, which begs the question, why? What is it, accessible websites have been around for a while. Why is it now getting so hot? And that's because of accessibility lawsuits. The big high-profile case was Winn-Dixie. This was 2 years ago, I think. A disabled user sued Winn-Dixie for the fact that their site wasn't accessible, and I think they got away with $250,000. And Winn-Dixie had to remediate their website, their accessibility, which probably cost them a lot more money, as we all know, when it comes to developing. So 10,000 lawsuits in 2018 alone, which was a 30% increase over 2017 for accessibility compliance lawsuits. That's massive. That's a 30% increase of anything in 1 year is massive. And in this case, it's lawsuits. A lot of this, how this works, is a law firm will find a disabled user and then use that disabled user as their pawn as they file mass lawsuits on websites. So these users will go to websites, they'll say a disabled user, they can't use it, they'll put them on a list, and then a mass lawsuits will go out, trying to just fish some money out of some of these lawsuits. And it's working. The big areas are Florida and New York. We work with a partner company based out of Chicago that does Drupal, but which is where they trained me on accessibility. They get calls every day from businesses in Florida and New York who have been targeted by these lawsuits, and now they need to find a solution. I sat on the phone with a business owner who owns a little ice cream shop in Florida, who was practically crying because her business got slammed with a $10,000 lawsuit, and she had no idea where to go. Was not expecting that. So basically how these things work, they file a lawsuit, and the court decides against whether it's graded against the WCAG 2.1 criteria. And there's no line in the sand. There's no line in the sand when it comes to accessibility. There's no, this site's accessible or it's not. It's very subjective. It's how much effort did these people put into making their site accessible? What kind of statements have they made? What kind of reasonable effort have they made to accommodate for these different audiences? So based on that reasonable effort, they give them generally an ultimatum. It's you need to remediate this, you need to rebuild, you have to pay this, there's a fine for this. But a lot of it comes down to, do they have things like a statement of accessibility, which is something you put on a website that says, right now it's kind of a short-term fix, but it's right now we're doing everything we can to make our site more accessible for all users. If you have any questions about accessibility, contact us here. Little things like that can actually go a long way, as a short-term fix. But basically, these brands are then faced with the decision to rebuild or remediate, and either one is a very expensive option. And right now, there's companies all across the U.S. who are selling these JavaScript overlays, where they for very cheap they can make your website accessible. They can fix your accessibility problems. Most of it is either short-term or BS, and a lot of the times it starts with a rebuild, which is a total pain for a lot of these brands. The basics, a lot of it is how websites have always been developed. Color, so this isn't accessible, but this is. There's a lot of it's color, a lot of it's text alternatives. So are you giving alt tags to all your images? Are you captioning your videos? That's the main stuff, is images and videos. Videos are becoming increasingly used on websites. And so now it's becoming a better idea to caption those videos so disabled users can view or understand. Basically, anything that's not text needs to be able to be understood in a text format. because they're going to be using screen readers. They're going to be using mostly screen readers, and they're going to want to know what does this non-text content actually mean. Users need to be able to control the site. They need to be able to navigate between menu items, control a carousel, pause or play a video. They need to do that through tab and the keyboard. Full navigation. Forms, the most important things on a website. They need to be able to understand the forms, the form labels, the placeholders, descriptions. There needs to be feedback, whether if they filled in a form incorrectly, it needs to be in a feedback in a form where a screen reader can read and understand and say you did not do this correctly. There's a lot of little nuances that go into one of these projects. Semantics is obviously a huge one. A lot of people already do this correctly, but a lot of people don't. A lot of it comes down to information architecture. So is my biggest main idea the top one, and does it make logical sense that I go from big idea to small idea, and does my semantic structure reflect that? That's a big one. ARIA landmarks, main navigation, main content, banner. These are little things in your HTML that are going to tell screen readers where we're at. And these expensive screen readers, you can command them to jump between landmarks. So the footer, the main content, the body area. These things need to have proper ARIA landmarks in order to be navigated correctly by some of these tools. And one thing, we use a tool that basically it'll just strip out all your CSS, and basically can the site be understood? Can the content be understood without any styling? Because these tools, they don't take the styling with it. They're just reading the HTML. They're just using the HTML, so it's stripping out all the CSS. And so a lot of people, kind of imagine that an accessible website is super boring or super lame or super dull, but I've seen some really nice examples of accessible websites that are clean, modern, and user-friendly. Which is another thing, is an accessible website is generally very user-friendly. If you do it correctly and you plan it out, it's almost just best practices to build it like that anyways. But basically, so let's say you're a company and you feel like you've done a pretty good amount of this stuff, like you guys are saying. My semantic structure is good, or I have text alternatives on all of my images. Unless you do all of this stuff, your website would not be accessible. You would probably be given a chance, if this was a wave of lawsuits that came to the Northeast. Right now it's in New York, but if this is something that came around here, you wouldn't be protected by just saying that, I put all text on my images. You need to show that you've followed through on some of these other things. Tab index is super important. So they need to be able to tab through your entire site and interact with it, as they need to. A lot of this stuff, if you're using WordPress, depending on your framework, if you're starting with a theme, some of these themes are really catching on. We use Impreza, and a lot of the landmark rules are built into it. Gravity Forms, for example, has an accessibility add-on. There a lot of these a lot of your softwares you're using, plugins you're using, are already adapting for this accessibility wave. So look out for that anytime you're searching for anything. Control F, accessible, when you're researching new softwares or plugins. So it's to be honest with you, accessibility is a real pain in the ass. When I started getting into it, the biggest thing was plan for it. A lot of people just design a website and then they try and make it accessible afterwards. It makes a lot more sense to plan the accessibility into your project plan. Do you need to have somebody audit your site? Because usually there are agencies and companies and firms out there who have disabled users who you can hire to audit your site, and basically they'll run through and try and use it, and they'll tell you what's good or what's not good. What's good about that is if you ever do get smacked with an accessibility lawsuit, I doubt it will happen to you, but if you ever do get smacked with an accessibility lawsuit, you're basically trying to provide proof that you're making an effort. It covers your tail a little bit. So it's, okay, I did have somebody audit my site. I did remediate the shortcomings that they pointed out. All these things make it so that, again, there's no line in the sand where you officially cross to accessibility land. It's a gradual, is this person making an effort? Okay, this site is either going to be accessible or it's accessible right now. And it's always a reasonable effort. So they don't expect a little mom and pop to spend $100,000 on a website redesign for accessibility. The language is reasonable effort. And where this all comes from, actually, it's the ADA, Americans for Disabilities Act. And so basically, recently, people have been interpreting that to mean not just your physical business, which the ADA stated that your physical business needed to be accessible by disabled users. Law firms are starting to interpret that to mean your online business as well, which is where this is all coming from, because there's a little wiggle room in the language where that's being used against online business owners now. So when you audit your site, you can either do it with a bunch of tools, which I'll show you guys kind of some tools, or you can hire an agency to do it, and they'll basically tell you whether you need to rebuild or remediate. A lot of people, I've always told rebuild. I've never really had a situation where I said it could be remediated. And then you need to develop a policy. So what kind of effort are you actually going to go through to make this thing accessible? You need to make that clear. That, again, this all helps you down the line if you ever run into any trouble. This is, okay, I even developed an accessibility plan. So, that's about, how much effort are you going to put in, and you need to put that in language, because that's going to go on your website at some point. Whenever you're building the site, you audit at key milestones, you run through the tools that I'm going to show you that can kind of give you an idea of where you're at with your accessibility, how much success, how are you sticking to the criteria? And one thing I do with a lot of builds, but especially with accessibility builds, is I build template or representative pages. So you build a couple of template pages for the different whatever different areas you imagine seeing on a site. The key is to keep it all consistent. That's one of the guidelines, is that the structure of the pages are consistent. So by developing a few template pages, representative pages, you can save time by building those, testing those, making those accessible, and then duplicating and changing up the content, rather than trying to do it all page by page. We've spoken to agencies who they've built their own themes, run them through to be completely accessible, and then they duplicate them, in a new install, change around some of the content, and now they're pushing out an accessible website for people. That is a big industry right now. You throw a pay-per-click campaign for accessibility rebuild, there are people looking for that, and it's not not oversaturated industry yet. It's still a market where you can go after, but you need to provide some sort of, whether you've been trained or you've spent some time learning it, you'll need to provide some expertise. So basically, you finalize it by you testing with disabled users. So our partner company in Chicago, for example, they have disabled users on staff, disabled developers on staff, and those developers test the sites. And basically what that means is when they hand us, a policy page and they say, PrometSource, our developer, who has this disability has run through and tested the site. I mean, that's real gold for anybody who's trying to, present themselves as a company that's pursued accessibility standards. And then train. So whether you're training your client who's going to take over the site, or you're training yourself, accessibility is constantly evolving. and you might push a website out the door that's accessible, and then somebody goes in and changes a bunch of stuff, and then it's not accessible anymore. So there are a ton of resources for training for accessibility. If you're interested, the company, PrometSource, this company out of Chicago, they do this great 2-day course. It's completely remote. It's $900, but it is killer. I did the 2-day camp. I walked out and then was able to tackle an accessibility project immediately. So I would find a resource for training you on accessibility. They'll throw you through websites and they'll ask you what's not accessible about this. What are some of the errors you're seeing? It's really quality stuff, especially if you're looking to turn any of this into a service. There are a ton of cool tools for accessibility. A quick search online, you'll see a million accessibility, 5 steps to accessibility. Accessibility checklists. There are a bunch of Chrome extensions. So this is an ARIA. This is called the Wave Reader. We'll find we'll go to their own website and wave read them. So this is a Chrome extension. Basically, it's pulling all of the content on the site, and it's telling you errors, alerts. It gives you all of the details for attacking this project. I really like this. So you can scroll around. It'll highlight where it sees an area. It gives you the semantic structure. It's telling you where it's seeing different landmarks, and you can see all of these errors that you might be running into. So alerts, you possibly missing a heading. I mean, there's a learning curve because it's a lot of information, but it's a very useful tool. This will basically strip out all the content. It's going to tell you right now, if I were to use a screen reader, here is what I would get for your semantic structure. And then you need to go and say, is that correct? Is that the way it should be presented? In accordance with the WCAG 2.1 accessibility guidelines. You can do a color contrast tool. I mean, I highly recommend this. If you're looking to kind of start evaluating some of your websites, you can see how many errors you have and get a better idea of how much work you're going to be putting into this. If this is something you want to do, another really cool tool is HTML code sniffer. So this looks, and it does something kind of similar, but it's kind of in an easier format. So you get to decide, do you want to go AAA standards, hold yourself to the highest standards, AA or single A, and then you can look at the report. So you can see, okay, it looked at my site. What are the kind of errors we're seeing? And it goes through. And what's really cool about this is it gives you the code snippet. It tells you the criteria in the guidelines that you're going to want to refer to if you're going to get this right. And it kind of gives you an overview of what the issue is. So this is really cool as well. None of these alone are going to make sure your site's accessible. The key thing is a user, is a disabled user. If you really want to present yourself as giving accessibility, presenting accessibility sites, you're going to find a disabled user. They don't have to be a developer. Someone with poor eyesight, someone with motor skills issues. If you can get them to run through your site, you can really present yourself as accessible and maybe find some little nuances. So that's a really cool tool. I've got this thing called Metal Mouth. And so this is a free screen reader, Chrome extension. There are really nice ones out there, and then there's this one, and it's super annoying, but it does get the job done. Problem is I never know how to turn it off. There we go. So that'll just run through, and it'll kind of give you an idea of how this would sound to somebody who's using a screen reader. And you might find that, my God, my website sounds super annoying. It's built in a way that it's super annoying for somebody, Maybe it takes too long for them to get to the content they need. I mean, all of these things are going to be used against you if someone comes forward and says your site's not accessible. So you're really trying to find the ultimate, the ultimate way of getting, all this information out very concisely. So that was one of the other tools. Pally. So basically, this is something you install on your desktop, and it's probably the premier tool for checking accessibility. It'll scan through your website. It'll give you feedback. It'll tell you what you need to do. It's up to date on all the guidelines. There's one called Pally. There's one called Koali. Same concept. I think one's for Mac and one's for PC. But highly recommend you look into those if you're looking to take this seriously. Screen readers. There's a Metalmouth one, but there are some really nice, $1,000 screen readers. I mean, for somebody who needs to use the internet and they can't use the internet, they're going to spend $1,000 on a screen reader. Just a no-brainer. And then there's tons of website scanners. So there, scan my site for compliance. You throw that in there. It's probably gets the basics, but it's probably a good place to start. But all these things together should be things that you go through during each milestone. So every time you kick out a new page or a new page, representative page or template page that you're going to build some other pages based off of, you should be running these tests. You should be perfecting it, and that way you're just duplicating and you're changing the content, maybe changing an image, adding an alt tag, double checking color, and then you can, with reasonable doubt, you can feel like you're nailing this accessibility thing. The common idea is, accessibility is probably it looks like a .gov site or something super boring, but there are a lot of, these are okay. These are just quick searches, but a lot of sites that that are accessible, that don't look that can look nice. It's just all about your planning. So it's all about figuring out what you're going to want your semantic structures to look like. How are you going to budget for this in terms of time? Especially if you're doing this for clients, they need to know there's a whole new aspect to this if you're going to be running tests. And then you might need to hire an agency to audit it. If we build an accessibility site, we do a lot of those tests as we're going. But then we send it off to an agency who runs manual testing on every page, and they come back with a spreadsheet that says this is what you did, this is what you didn't do, and then I can hand that off to a client and say, we put in a lot of work. We've tried this accessibility thing. We might not have hit every criteria, but you are far ahead of most of the people most websites, 99% of websites. There's a lot of effort that's gone into this. You need to send it off to somebody to audit, and it can be expensive. If a lot of companies do it on a page-by-page basis, and they can charge, some of them are $400 a page. So it's something you want to budget into your cost. And so a lot of the times when I'm, speaking with an association, and they don't really know about accessibility. They have no idea. What is accessibility? I bring it up. I tell them it takes a lot longer and it's a lot more expensive, and they say, I don't want to do that, right? Obviously. So that's going to be less convenient as we're moving in, to this new wave, as precedent is starting to be set in a sense that the law, legally, it is becoming kind of assumed that websites need to be accessible. And there's a lot of rumblings that it's going to be required by law, strict requirements for ADA, at least to a certain extent, within the next 2 or 3 years. So, just like GDPR was this big thing that, all these companies, had to plan for, adapt, and implement, accessibility could be one of those things that's coming down the pipe. And so companies in Florida and New York are already feeling it. Like I said, a little ice cream shop, a little hotel on the beach in Florida called us and said they had just, they just settled a lawsuit for $5,000, a little hotel, and now they need to remediate and fix. This is real life. This is happening to businesses. And what are they doing? Well, they're going on Google and they're searching, accessibility developers or accessibility agencies, or and they're getting sold these, like I was saying earlier, they're overlays. So basically, you add it to your site, and it just uses JavaScript to reorder the navigation, and it kind of gives it a quick fix. And a lot of that's temporary because it's like fixing the symptom and not the disease. But they're getting sold a lot of those solutions. But the best solution is an agency or an individual who knows accessibility, who's been trained in accessibility, and who can plan accessibility into all of their builds, or at least the builds that you're getting approached to do. So this is like, a lot of this is just, you see this thing that came up when I tabbed? Skip to main content. That's a feature that they love, accessible users, because they don't have to go through, they don't have to tab through all the social links, all the menu. Maybe the menu's got 60 pages. Maybe they just want to tab and go straight to main content. A lot of that's your landmark roles. That's your ARIA landmark role that's saying main content. It gives it that. So there's plugins. There's WP Accessibility. That's a plugin. It adds skip links. It gives you a color contrast toolbar. That's actually a pretty good solution. It can add markup to your HTML. You need to customize it for your build, but WP Accessibility would be something I'd recommend you look into and see if you can start to work with it a little bit. That came out, I think, in 2017 or 2016, and it's been constantly getting updated, which means that there's a reason for that. So that's basically the long and short of what's going on in the accessibility world. I wanted to now see if you guys had any questions about the development process in terms of the planning, implementation, and kind of how do you start something like that, or is it worth it? Anybody have any questions for me?
I have one question. Out of the box, how accessible is WordPress? And then that gap between being accessible and not,
Right.
What is it caused by? Is it caused by themes, plugins?
Sure. So yeah, like if you're using like 2017 or 2016 as your theme, you're pretty accessible. It's this web design. It's called brutalism, in terms of the design, I guess the philosophy. And basically, it's just pretty strict text, some good heading structure, and some good buttons. That's basically what those themes are, and those are pretty accessible out of the box. What starts, when you start adding sliders, carousels, background images, parallax. Parallax for somebody who has nausea. I built a site, and then the developers, the testers came back and said, there's too much parallax on this. This could give somebody vision problems. Is there any flashing going on the screen? And for epilepsy, but most of the time it comes when people want to get creative. And that sucks, because if you're trying to be creative and you have to constantly look over your back at accessibility guidelines, you can feel kind of constrained. But plugins, if you start throwing an online shop in there, WooCommerce is okay, but it's not it's not fully accessible. You've got to start that, and then you're diving into custom programming. You need to, maybe it's a child theme you need to add. I mean, it's accessible out of the box, but by the time you're done kind of building something, unless you're using just 2017, 2016, if you're using any of your own themes, some themes are much more accessible than others.
Oh boy, it went right out of my mind because I was thinking of two things. There was a big kerfluffle this week with Gutenberg.
Right.
Accessibility.
Right.
Huge.
Right.
Apparently, to me, it seemed pretty big because he was saying, hey, I'm in charge of accessibility and you're not letting me do my job. I think was
Right.
the thing of it. So something like Gutenberg is going to, if that isn't accessible, we're all in trouble.
Right.
See what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, Gutenberg might not be your best page builder solution. You know, Visual Composer, WP Bakery, that's a pretty accessible solution. That's the one I've mainly worked with. I haven't, you know, I'm not sure about some of these other, the themes though, that these companies, these themes are starting to build accessibility into their updates and into their patches, and they're stupid if they're not. So yeah, Gutenberg might not be at this point, but there are other options that are further down the road than Gutenberg.
Well, and then the other thing is, and here, let's have a little fun. If you could go to serverpilot.io, which is, you know, a company I do business with, and they just did a refresh on their site. So we got a brand new site. And if you scroll down a bit, you know, it's not quite so apparent here, but their text is so light, it's unreadable on
Right.
a normal screen.
Sure.
Contacted them a couple times and said, look, I can't read your screen. I'm one of your biggest fans, but, you know, come on. And they said, oh, yeah, well, we'll talk to our developer about that. And I'm going, no, you won't. You'll do it right for crying. What's your problem?
Right.
You know? It's not a question. It's like, it just is. And am I backed up by that nice plugin?
Yeah, I mean, this is saying,
Horrible?
this is saying you don't have sufficient contrast. I mean, this, you know, this simple and secure, that is not sufficient contrast. If you're anybody who has any sort of, you know, eye problems or color, you know, eyesight deficiencies, that you're struggling with that.
Yeah.
So,
I do at home, and I have a pretty good screen. And
Right.
there's glasses, but, like, you know.
right, you'd be amazed by how many people actually do struggle to access certain areas of websites. You know, that it's not just this random group of people out in like Nevada. It's like your neighbor is struggling to, you know, access or read some of the content on a website.
Fascinating.
Yeah, no, you know, you can always run some reports through here, and you know, these guys have 38 errors and 8 warnings. You know, it might be worth, you know, a lot of it could have to links that are going to other sites. You need to tell a user who's using a screen reader or some sort of tool, you're about to leave the site. You know, that information needs to be in the anchor. You know, like or else they're popped onto a new site and their screen readers is spilling out new content. And trust me, if you want to know how frustrating it is, get Metal Mouth or some crappy screen reader and try and browse the internet, and it'll drive you nuts. It drove me nuts. So you kind of feel a little bit of sympathy for people who want to access, you know, this content. So.
Yeah. And of course, as I get older and I get cataracts and everything, nothing really gets any better.
Right, you could be doing audits. Yeah.
But, you know, hopefully, when I do get the operation, hopefully that'll fix something. Anything.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's not worth doing.
Sure.
But you know, I want this company to stay in business, and I don't want their clients to be mad when they visit the site because they can't read it. And it creates eye strain and headaches and everything.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it's not bad because it's pretty simple. It doesn't have anything fancy, no pop-ups, no,
Sure.
you know, there.
Because I only know the contrast. That's my judgment of it. If
Right.
It's accessible or not. You know?
Right.
Yeah, because and a few years ago, light gray text on a lighter gray background became a design.
Sure.
Or a design genius.
Sure.
Who did that?
Yeah. No. Yeah, you'll spend a lot of time balancing between like creative, you know, trending, and what's practical and accessible. And it can be challenging, but you know, it can be fun in that sense because you're trying to find the best way to, you know, that's why it's good. I think it's good for developers because it's kind of a problem that they need to like fix and they need to focus on, and they run into these challenges and these roadblocks. But you work through it, and then you push the wave reader, and there's no errors. You're like, wow, I nailed it. So there's some satisfaction there too. Most people aren't doing it out of the good of their heart. You know, I never get a call from somebody who's like, we want to be proactive. You know, we care about our disabled users. You know, we really want to, you know, spend the money to make this accessible. That never happens. It's generally, you there's a fire under our ass. I need you to build me. I need you to like look at my website and tell me what I need to do.
Y2K, a lot of money to be made.
There's a lot of money to be made from people who do it well.
Right.
You don't want to sell snake oil. You don't want to waste people's time or people's money. If you want to get into this accessibility wave that's coming, you lay the foundation now.
Right.
And you find the best ways to build accessibly, because it's time consuming, and your projects that might have taken you 4 to 6 weeks now are going to take you twice as long. So, yeah. What's up, Shane?
To make sure I understand correctly, screen readers can read HTML's change via JavaScript, right?
Yes. Well, so it depends on the screen reader. The expensive ones do, but you can't tailor it just to expensive ones. Basically, that's why they recommend Metal Mouth, because it's the cheapest, run-of-the-mill screen reader. You want to do it whatever the capabilities of the lowest end tool is to reach the widest audiences. So Metal Mouth does not.
It doesn't?
No. Super basic. No. No, JavaScript, it becomes a challenge for a lot of developers, especially when it comes to submitting forms and any sort of interaction. It's how do we work around that? But no, this one doesn't.
Yeah, so NV Access, that's the big free one.
Screen reader?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, it's like, what's the thing say, we believe that every blind and vision impaired person deserves the right to freely and easily access a computer, and it's a non-profit, and that's like, because like you said, they sell them for like thousands of dollars.
Jaws is the big one. I
Yeah.
just forgot. Jaws is like the big, like top of the line screen reader. I have heard of that.
I've seen a movie about it too, I think.
3 movies.
Yeah, I had eye surgery, and I can only see like a foot in front of my face, so I was like, I guess I'm going screen reader. And
No way. You're a screen reader guy, huh?
yeah, no, it was only for like 3 days, but like, wow.
What'd you think?
Wow. Everything you go over.
It reads. No, it can be,
It's intense.
yeah. No, I think
Maybe
it's.
I'll just go back to like getting real close.
I think the Chinese developed a torture method in the early century, and it's just sitting you in front of a computer and having you listen to a screen reader.
Water.
Yeah.
You gotta get a screen reader in a Morgan Freeman voice.
Oh, actually.
Right,
I
right.
actually have we can do it after. I have a recording of it's a person using a screen reader at what would be their normal speed, and it's unbelievably fast.
Oh, really?
You're
Oh.
It sounds like it's, I don't know, sped up or something.
Right. I'm sure they just get used to it.
Yeah,
They
it's
just.
just like we do, where you're just scrolling through.
Right.
Like that's what they're doing, but all in sounds, and so it's yeah. So I suppose you want to take that into account too. Like it's not like they want to go super
Right. I mean,
slow.
yeah. No, I'll go through a site, and it's like, the screen reader's trying to get to this piece of text, and the way they put their site together, it's like, section. It'll do 15 sections and then get to the text, and then we start moving on to the next thing. So like, that's stuff you want to listen to. You want to hear. If it's a pain in the ass, but you want to kind of be like, okay, what is this going to be like for this poor person who has to go through this? So, but like you said, some people just are so good at it now. They just they can like kind of just dissect a site with a screen reader very quickly, which is crazy.
Of the evals or audits or projects you guys see, what percentage are remediation versus rebuilds?
Most of them, a lot of them go remediation. I don't recommend it. I always say rebuild, but a lot of them will go remediation because remediation is the cheaper option. So I'd say probably 60% start at remediation, and they make this mistake. They start at remediation. They go to one of these companies that says they can give them a fully accessible website or an overlay or something else or a remediation. They spend a bunch of money on it, and then they realize that they didn't get it done correctly, and then they go to rebuild. But I'd say most people, like, they don't want to deal with this. They don't want to spend $10,000 getting this done. So they go for the cheaper option. which is generally remediation. To give you an idea of pricing, again, the company we work with out of Chicago, who's kind of leading this charge in terms of accessibility, if we build a 10-page site and we want 5 of the pages tested for audit, just tested. They're not making any of the fixes. They're just having developers run manual tests. It could cost $7,000 to test a 10-page website that I'm billing out at 2 or 3. So how can I justify that? How do you make that happen? That's something that people are trying to find better solutions for, because that's not realistic for most people. So the testing always turns out to be more than the web build. And so if you can find a solution to make that, to change that, maybe it's the way you have your process set up, or your relationship with your auditor or your tester, you can compete.
Have you set up any type of automation in your projects to help?
We've thought about it. There's so many tools out there that could do it way better than we could, that are already, up to speed. The only real automation we've done is pre-building some of these things, like I was explaining earlier, and just, recycling, which isn't really automation, but it's kind of our workaround. But there are a lot of cool automation tools already out there that we kind of leverage for our own builds.
I was exploring Pally as a CI tool.
Right, Pally's good.
But the problem was that we didn't have a way to, the sites are so complex in the WordPress site, so there wasn't a good way to have a site to test the changes against.
Right.
And have the source of truth versus the changed version.
Right.
Kind of fizzled out on that one, but it was really cool. I had it running in Travis, but it didn't have the proper things to compare.
Right. What was the site?
Well, I used to work at Boston University, so it was something I was looking at while I was there.
Right.
And we didn't have the time to keep looking into it at the time. So,
Right.
yeah, I was curious if you had solved that.
That's a big thing with universities right now. They're trying to make their sites accessible, and not only that, they're training their department heads, their teachers, the people who are posting content. They're training them to write the content accessibly and post the content accessibly. They're starting to implement that just into their basic design structure, is accessibility. A lot of universities all over that right now. What's up?
What are some of the big mistakes you see clients make when you hand over a site? Is it mostly semantics, using headers in the wrong places, or?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, even just images. If we've got an image with a certain text over it, the contrast worked well the way we had it, and then they've changed an image, and the text isn't visible anymore. They didn't add an alt tag or an alt text. They didn't do any of that. We try and be like, don't touch the menu. We can do that stuff for you. But it's just like day-to-day content stuff that they just don't think about. Which is why we generally recommend a yearly audit, a yearly revision, where basically all the tests are run again on a yearly basis. Just because you were compliant last November doesn't mean you can stand up to compliance now. So you run tests on a yearly basis to try and flush some of that out and see where you're at, because of changes that are done on a day-by-day basis by regular users. So.
CSS code that's hidden. Well, I'm sorry, HTML, hidden with CSS. You know if that's right?
Yeah, well, so again, if you're talking about screen readers, yeah, I was getting murdered on it.
Like I saw a project one time that had a paragraph for screen readers, but they hid it.
Right.
CSS to hide it from the site, but then I was told in the background, somebody using a screen reader, that would have been read to them.
That would have been read to them, yes. Yeah. No, a lot of people do that. Yeah, basically because you're stripping the CSS out, all that's coming out and hanging out. So you're getting to read all that, and basically it'll read any HTML, but it doesn't care about your CSS. look like you want to ask a question.
I was just wondering, how would it read CS? I could barely read it.
Right.
What would it say?
Right. And so basically, one thing,
It's a styling thing.
it's just, yes, and so basically the one thing that they try and encourage when they go through this training is, don't imagine, yeah, you might have a site that looks nice and it's easy to understand on the front end visually, but when all that CSS is gone, it's just going to be words. So what is it going to look like? What is that experience going to be for somebody? Some companies try and get the branding in there still. But simple as possible is generally the best route. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to call all my clients and tell them they got to rebuild their site on 2017 WordPress theme.
Right. Good luck.
It's going to cost 20 grand.
Good luck. Good luck. Let me know how that goes. But yeah, so a lot of people don't want to do it. It's kind of it's like, why? Until I have somebody who's knocking on my door, why? That's a lot of work. It's a lot of resources to do something like that. I get that. I just want to show you if that initiative ever does get kicked off, here's the reasons why, and here's kind of the first steps for going after it.
Are the screen readers for cell phones? Is there a whole responsive element to this too?
There is a responsive element to this. Mobile responsiveness is a huge part of it. That's actually, I think, one of the criteria that came out in the 2.1 is, it has to be mobilely responsive because, 60% of people are looking at it from a tablet or a phone. So, again, the widest audience of people is basically what you're going for. So, I'm not sure about screen readers for cell phones. I know, I know, like, for example, Mac has an accessibility, has a voiceover already built into it. Maybe the iPhones and the Androids have some sort of accessibility feature in the settings, but mobile responsiveness is the big one.
Yeah, iOS has that also, but it's just as awful as
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, voiceover, is that on, yeah.
You can just turn on accessibility and you swipe up.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no,
There you go.
isn't that, imagine. No.
One last question.
Sure.
Making a site accessible does not really, although it may be more expensive and more harder to do, it doesn't hurt the average non-disabled user in any way. And I would think it could sometimes enhance.
Sure.
If a site is properly structured so that.
Yeah, there's a lot of, if you're presenting your information correctly in an organized, hierarchical way, that's good for everybody.
Right.
That seems to be best practice.
It's best practice. A lot of this stuff was best practice. A lot of it was best practice in like the 90s or the early 2000s when people were building simple sites, and now things have gone all sorts of doing all sorts of things, and then kind of gotten away from best practices. And this is kind of bringing you back, incorporating some of those techniques into new builds.
Parallax never happened, that would be just fine with me.
Right. Right.
It's exciting for 5 minutes. Oh, look.
Right.
I actually have to read this website for crying.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Accessibility is good for people like you then. So yeah. Any other questions, Shane?
I'll Google it, but do you happen to know of any, like a theme rating website?
No.
Can you get a theme?
God, I've looked.
It'd probably be a good business to start.
There are some.
You better cut that out of video.
There are some real basic themes out there that claim to be ADA compliant, 508 compliant. They're very basic. I don't think they're very robust in their customization options. You're probably stuck in a box where you can change a couple things, but the only way they're going to sell you something that's ADA is making it very restrictive as to what you can do. You can't break it. So that's why I'd find a theme or like a page builder that has like a good, that does ARIA landmarks well, good markup, and then use that as a foundation.
Or build one and sell it for $2,000.
Right? What was it? I know, I use, I don't know if anyone else does,
Oh, really?
That one, I mean, I did like you know, portfolio page. I was like, geez, they got like just way in there.
Oh, yeah. No,
Oh yeah, they were like, you use this like alt caption twice. That's a no-no. Way in
It'll
there.
be
You
your-
don't have to- I mean, obviously that's like a low rank. You know, they rank them, but
Yeah, but it'll be your worst enemy. It goes
that one, and it's free. I mean, it's
right.
they don't charge you. You can put the URL in, or you can run the CLI. And it also has an adorable purple whale as a mascot.
Sold. But yeah. Anything else? Anything else for me? Pick my brain.
Kind of like a cool, I always find cool is accessibility if someone tries to print your site. So if you print it and you have gray text, like gray text doesn't look very nice.
Sure. Sure.
It's always something I hate to do at the university. Sometimes that the things are printing correctly.
Oh, interesting.
Contrast and-
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. PDFs. If you have PDFs on your site and you want to claim to be accessible, you need to make your PDFs accessible. You know, there are companies in Indonesia or the Philippines where they'll make your PDFs accessible for like $8 a PDF or something, like dirt cheap, and you can send them 1,000 and whatever else. But if your PDFs need to be accessible. Like, you know, it's everything. It's your forms. The big thing is forms, contact forms. That there's some, you know, depending on what software you're using, is it Ajax? You know, the way it's being handled, you need to. It needs to be very intuitive and easy to use for somebody who can't see. So, yeah, try using a form with one of your screen readers. That'll put the nail in the coffin for you. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Dylan.
Cool. Am I early?